What's up, TSOD fam? It's your boy Sean. Welcome back to the TSOD channel. Super excited to be back with you guys. I've got another exciting episode for you today. All right, so you guys probably been wondering like, what's up? I haven't dropped any videos for a while. Well, I've been working on a bunch of projects, guys. I gotta, spend time with the family, friends, priorities, all right? So appreciate you guys hanging in there, continuing to subscribe, continuing to watch and like my videos. All right, so today is the day, all right? We are gonna be talking all about trigger control, okay? Now, the reason why I wanted to make this video is because I was at a family event about a week ago or so, and I saw a really good family friend of ours that is actually going through the police academy here in Southern California. Really good guy. But for whatever reason, when we started talking, I was like, so how's the academy going? He's like, it's awesome, man. Like physical, the physical stuff, being with the guys, the recruits, cadets, I don't know what they call them as they're going through. That whole part of it, super awesome. But he was having some issues during the marksmanship portion of the course. So I was like, yeah, man, like what's going on? Tell me, like, I know some things, been around the block a little bit. Talk to me, what's going on? So we started talking, and then, basically he told me that for one reason or another, all of his shots were impacting at a certain location, impacting low, and he was just having issues with the pistol. Now for them, they're being trained on the SIG P320. So I was like, all right, easy day, I got this. So we just started talking. We started, really starting to diagnose and dive deep into what actually was going on. What was he doing to cause all those shots to pretty much gather in one group, but low? And then that reminded me of a time way back in the day in the military where I first started to actually learn the fundamentals of marksmanship. And I just kind of went into just like a quick hip pocket class, 5 minutes, telling him about more than likely all the things that he was doing to cause those shots to impact where they were and not exactly where he wanted them to go. All right, so that's what this video is all about. I'm gonna try to keep it short and sweet for you guys, but you have to stick around till after the intro, all right? I'll see you in a sec. All right, guys, welcome back to the TSOD channel. Before we get into the trigger control video for today, I just want to let you know, I know I touched on it in a previous video, but I finally got my G-code sort of RTI duty mount, my paddle mount here. So it's here, it's physically here. And I don't know, during another video or something, I will install it, I'll put it on there just because I've been meaning to do this for a hot minute and I finally got around to ordering it. So good on you, G-code. I love G-code. I love their products. I love their holsters and much more from G-code. So go check them out. I'll drop a link in the description box below to their website. And oh, by the way, guys, check this out. All right, this is the Clever Co. PAL. All right, you can use this to basically have a much faster reload and still stay Cali compliant. For all my Cali folks, I'm in California. So I have you can use this with the AR mag lock, right? The AR mag lock itself, the magazine lock, as well as the AR mag lock kingpin, which is basically sort of their kind of quick release that still allows you to comply with the laws. All right, so this guy basically allows the two to work in tandem or simultaneously or, one right after, whatever. It basically speeds that process up that much faster. It makes it a little bit more efficient and ergonomic. So I'll be installing this on my rifle at some point in the near future, but shout out to Clever Co. for devising or coming up with this little cool device. I'll show you this here in a second. All right, so let's dive deep into why you're here and why you're watching this video. So we're talking about trigger control today, and before we get into the nitty-gritty of it, trigger control is probably one of the most fundamentally important parts of the engagement or of the shot period, right? It's just as important, maybe more important than the draw, the grip, the presentation, the sight alignment, the sight picture, and then all of that combined into the culmination of that trigger press or pull, however you want to call it. So trigger control is very, very important. And that's why I want to start off with finger placement, right? Finger placement on that trigger, all right? This is condition 4, it's clear, all right? Finger placement is key, all right? A lot of people will harp on grip, they'll harp on stance and things like that. For me, this is when we're getting down to the nitty gritty, and this is, you know, super critical to basically having an effective engagement that you can repeat, a repeatable, effective engagement. So trigger control, where you place your finger on that trigger is crucial, all right? I'll see this a lot of times with students, new shooters, both rifle and pistol, but more so on pistol because you have, in my opinion, a lot less room for error versus a rifle, which you can kind of extend out and you can stabilize a little bit more than you can without applying the proper fundamentals, in my opinion, versus a pistol where you really have to kind of think and really apply good fundamentals to get repeatable, accurate shots. So for me, when I'm placing my finger on that trigger, I'm using primarily the back portion of the first pad of that pointer or trigger finger. I'll notice a lot of people will use the very tip, they'll use the middle of the second pad, or in my opinion, one of the worst spots is right in the center because then it's a lot more rigid, almost like bone right in there, using it on the center. So for me, I use basically just the kind of the middle or back edge of the pad, not in the center here, the crease of the knuckle, and not on the second pad. And I'll tell you the reason why, all right? What I'll tend to see when shooters will place the front pad of their finger on that trigger, all right, you don't get as much control on that actual pull. When you pull that trigger, you want it to come straight back. You don't want to pull left or right or up or down. You want a straight back pull so that way you're not inducing or affecting the angle of the pistol basically. So ideally, you'll have enough meat on the back edge of that front pad to where I'm gonna go ahead and pull that trigger. You want it straight back, all right? You don't want it left or right. I see it all the time where people will crab claw, and I'll show you what I mean. They'll crab claw by basically putting that trigger finger in there and digging it all the way across, and what they'll tend to do is kind of pull those shots a little bit to the left a lot of times, or if they just put the front pad of their finger on the trigger, what they tend to do is they don't have enough strength in that trigger finger, and they'll tend to pull those shots to the right a lot of times. All right, I understand that this doesn't address the issue with the low shots, and I'm gonna get to that, I promise. But we've gotta start out with the basics, all right, of the finger placement. And for me, like I said, that's right at the back edge of the first pad, not in the crease, but right at the back edge. So now that we've got finger placement down, let's move into the actual pull itself, the trigger pull. I touched on this a little bit, but you want a straight back pull. You don't want to pull that pulls to the left or right or up or down. You want a straight back pull. And what that means is, and you can see it with basically just holding it with your support hand, whether that be if you're lefty or righty. And I just want you to go ahead and place that finger in and around where I basically just talked you through. And I want you to do a straight back pull, and you'll notice that basically the center of gravity, the ergonomics of the weapon it will stay in place, and I'll reset it, all right, versus crab clawing it. I don't know if you can see it, where now you're tend to induce a little bit of left or right movement in there. So that trigger pull is super key. You want a straight back pull. Okay, straight back. Let's go into trigger prep and stages. All right, so when we're talking about trigger prep or the stages, there's really 3 kind of primary stages as I know it or as I remember. And you know, the first one being basically the take up, all right? The take up, and what I mean by take up is I mean the slack within, or the travel within that trigger. And if you can see it here, you can see all that slack, all that take up that I'm doing before I start to hit what we call the wall, all right? The wall is basically that point right where you start to get resistance and you're actually getting ready to, you know, break or release the striker and allowing that round to actually fire. So you've got the, you know, the take up right here, the slack basically taking the slack out. Now this, in my opinion, is one of the things I focus on with new, even intermediate shooters, is to get the slack out of that trigger, all right? That is gonna allow you to really fine tune that weapon and really get those shots nice and dialed in. When you have a lot of play and a lot of slack that's still left inside that trigger, that's when your shots start to, in my experience, start to kind of dance around, because you're looking for it, you're muscling it, and you're basically looking, you're trying to find where that wall is. But if you kind of build that muscle memory, ingrain it into your process of firing, you can take up a lot of that slack and get a lot more precise shots on target, all right? Repeatable, accurate, precise shots, all right? So number one being basically taking up the slack, and as you can see it right here, there's quite a bit of slack in this Glock trigger. Not my favorite, all right, but I would say the 320 is probably worse, all right, for all my SIG guys out there. But there's quite a bit of slack here that we want to take up, and then we hit that wall where we start to meet some resistance, all right? And as we hit that wall, at some point, it's going to break, all right? And it may surprise you, okay, which gets into, I'll touch on surprise versus consistent break, but that trigger break, all right, depending on what the poundage is, it may take a little while, depending on the fire control group, the trigger mechanism, there might be quite a bit of travel inside of there before you hit that wall and before it breaks or releases, okay? So talked about trigger break. Let's go into surprise versus a surprise break versus a consistent break. There's two trains of thought on this. Some people, in my opinion, how I was always taught and how I teach is, you want that surprise break. You want to take the slack out of the trigger to be able to fine tune. Now, I don't say this in a sense to where it should surprise you every single time, but you're not necessarily focusing too much on the travel and the pull. You're focusing on the threat, the target, number one. You're also focusing on the sights. I would say, in my opinion, the trigger pull would be third in line of that. So it should surprise you that you're focusing on those two things first, and then you take the slack out of the trigger, you hit the wall, and then it breaks. So, you should understand of like where that's at. And that's where that other train of thought comes in where, oh, you should have that consistent break. It should be consistent every single time. And that's true. When you're a more seasoned shooter, you shot quite a bit, you understand it, you know where that travel is or how much of that slack is in there. You know when you hit the wall, yes, it should be very consistent. But for newer shooters to not focus on the trigger pull as much to where they anticipate, which we'll talk about next, should have that surprise break, okay? So I hope I didn't confuse anybody when we're talking about surprise break versus consistent break. In my opinion, it's kind of the same thing. Once you get to a certain level, the terminology sort of switches, all right? Enough said on that. Let's talk about anticipation, which is what I believe was a primary issue that my buddy was having, going through the police academy, was anticipation. I've seen it time and time again, guys and gals, where that shooter is anticipating, all right, worrying about when that round's actually going to fire, not necessarily doing all those steps on the trigger prep and the surprise break, things like that. And they're trying to kind of muscle the weapon, and then they anticipate the shot. And generally you'll see it, clear as day. I've seen it on dozens and dozens of shooters, students, is they'll have a nice tight group, but it'll all be generally low of the target. And that a lot of that is just that anticipation each time, pulling that trigger and just kind of jerking the trigger, anticipating, losing focus of their sights, their front and rear sights, to where it's just dipping down every single time. And a lot of times it's very consistent. They're like, man, I'm just so frustrated. I'm doing all the things that I need to do. I have, good sight alignment, equal height, equal light in terms of where that front and rear sight relationship is. But all my shots are low. And I'm like, okay, talk me through what you're doing. How is your trigger pull? Where's your finger placement on the trigger? Are you taking the slack out? All those things. And once I start to break down and then implement some drills, some fixes, you just see that shot group start to, just raise right up, and it's right there, right where they're actually intending to impact. All right, so anticipation, that 100% I believe was what was happening to my buddy. I talked him through that. I talked him through some ways to change that, identify it, fix it, and I mean, he's good. We've got a shoot day hopefully set up here in the near future. I told him if he had any more issues, hit me up and we would do one-on-one and work through that. Yeah, so let's talk now about shot placement versus shot impact, all right? Your shot placement is ideally where you want to shoot. And I'm gonna transition here to my handy dandy SIRT pistol that has a nice little cool little laser here. Hopefully you guys can see this. So you're intending to shoot here in the chest or wherever, but for, you know, right here, as I'm pulling that trigger right here in the center, but all of a sudden your shots are just continually impacting down low. Now, what I can do with this SIRT pistol here is I can train indoors because it's a laser pistol, and I can line, you know, I've got a front and rear sight just like this, and I can kind of see that anticipation. You can kind of, mimic it here indoors. And what it tends to be is, like, let's say I'm aiming right here. You'll see it a lot of times, you know, they're wanting to fire so bad and they're waiting for that break. And then all of a sudden they just anticipate and that shot drops low every time, just like that, right in the same spot. So that is what it's occurring, is your shot placement wants to be here, but your impacts are actually down there, okay? So let's talk about some drills now on how you can actually fix this, okay? It is fixable, believe it or not. It's not the end of the world. You can fix this 100%. All right, so one of the number one ways that you can do this without any sort of assistance, all by yourself, in the comfort of your own home, whatever, is through dry fire practice, all right? If you haven't heard of dry fire is awesome. I do it all the time, many times, most of the time before I go and shoot, just to kind of rebuild that muscle memory, work out those jitters, relearn where that travel is, all right? Where that travel or that slack is in the pistol to where I can hit the wall, whether it's pistol or rifle, to where that trigger, all right, that fire or that striker release, that break, where it actually sits. And I'll do this multiple times. I'll work through my stance. I'll work through my grip, my presentation, sight alignment. And I'll do this all dry without actually having rounds in the chamber or in the weapon, period. So dry fire is really great. As long as you don't have a magazine in, you could just reset that trigger. And again, as I'm presenting out, as you can see, as I'm presenting out, watch my finger here. I marry up, I've got a good grip, I'm focusing on my target. Now I'm starting to punch out or present out. And then as I'm doing that, you can see my finger right here. As I'm doing that, I am starting to prep, right? I'm prepping my trigger. I'm taking the slack out of it until I hit that wall. And at that full extension or whenever I feel comfortable, I'm sighted in, I know my target, I'm aware of what's in front of it and behind it, and I'm actually ready to fire. I'm already there. I'm there about halfway out to the presentation, and then boom, surprise break. You notice that my muzzle didn't really dip much at all. So you can do that drill. You can do it on your own in the comfort of your own home. Another one, if you have a buddy with you, you can basically do another dry fire drill, and it's a brass drill. I love the brass drill, guys. You present all the way out, and you basically just have someone put a spent casing on the top, all right? And then what you're gonna do is put your finger on that trigger, all right? Obviously without a round in there, it's gonna be dry, condition 4, and you're gonna pull and remove the slack out of that trigger. You're gonna get that break. Oh, all right, I'm trying to do this single-handedly. Not the easiest thing to do. Let's see if I can do it. Okay. Okay. Nailed it. All right, so ideally you wanna be all the way presented out. You have a buddy on your side, not in front of you. Ideally, you're gonna do this with a dry weapon, condition 4, and they'll just place this and you'll be able to work through the prepping and staging of the trigger and be able to fire each time. You just reset, present back out there. Your buddy puts this on the front sight post or somewhere on the front of the slide, and you're basically trying to not make it fall off, okay? So that is the brass drill. You got regular dry fire. You also have the dummy drill that you can do here. So I got a couple dummy rounds just like I showed you. Now the dummy drill is something that you would want to do on the range. You can do it with live ammunition, okay? But here's a caveat on that. You have a buddy that basically has you remove the magazine, he turns away so that you can't see what they're doing, and they put in 1 or 2 of these rounds. They mix it in with live ammunition in a controlled, safe environment, and now you go in, you go and point down range, you engage, but oh, by the way, 1 of these or 2 or however many of these rounds is going to be a dummy round that's not able to be fired just like this. These snap caps are made by, or good brand is A Zoom. All right, they make them in all different calibers. So again, you can integrate those snap caps into your training regimen, however you want to do it. All right, guys. So dry fire, the brass drill, dummy round drill, however you want to do it. Okay, so that is it in a nutshell. Try to keep this one short and sweet. I primarily made this video for my buddy, but at the same time, I wanted to make it for you, all of my subscribers, all of my followers out there, to hopefully help you with your trigger control if you're starting to see things or have issues with, shots, just not impacting where you want it. Try some of these things that I talked about, and you'll be surprised to see that it may just help you out or not. All right. That's all I got for you guys today on this episode of the TSOD channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. And oh, by the way, head on over to tsodshop.com. You can get some sweet merch like these shirts, hats here from my buddy Bob. All right. And I'll see you guys on the next episode of TSOD. Peace.